The pristine medical bay of Space Station Gamma 7 hummed with its usual quiet efficiency until Dr. Clara burst through the doors, her silver scales reflecting the harsh medical lights. In her 15 years as the station's chief physician, she had never encountered a case quite like this one. Ambassador Sylvana lay on the examination table, her usually brilliant azure skin now dull and clammy. The Lysarian diplomat's breathing came in short, labored gasps, and the delicate gill-like structures along her neck fluttered erratically. "Your body temperature is 3 degrees above normal, Ambassador," Dr. Clara reported, studying the holographic readouts floating above the bed. Her inner eyelids blinked rapidly, a sign of deep concern among her people. "And it's rising." Sylvana tried to speak, but only managed a weak whisper. "The cooling systems, they're not working properly." Dr. Clara had treated Lysarians before, but only for minor ailments. She knew their species had evolved a complex network of cooling ducts throughout their bodies, similar to a radiator system, to regulate their temperature. Without proper functioning of these ducts, a Lysarian could literally cook from the inside out. "I've administered the standard treatment for duct blockages," she said, checking the medical logs. "But your body isn't responding as it should." The ambassador's personal aide, Telener, hovered nervously nearby. "This has happened before," he explained, wringing his hands. "But usually there are specialists on our homeworld who help clear the blockages." Specialists. Dr. Clara's antenna twitched with interest. "What kind of specialists?" "Maybe we can replicate their treatment." Telener's skin flushed a deeper blue, the Lysarian equivalent of a blush. It's not something we discuss with other species. It's very private, very cultural." "But without access to a specialist." He glanced worriedly at the ambassador. Dr. Clara checked the station's communication logs. "The nearest Lysarian medical ship is 3 days away." She looked at her patient's vital signs and shook her head. "She doesn't have that long." The doctor spent the next 4 hours consulting every medical database available to her. She reached out to colleagues across 3 star systems, but none had encountered this specific situation before. Meanwhile, Sylvana's condition continued to deteriorate. "Doctor," one of the human nurses, Sarah Chen, called out urgently. Her core temperature just spiked another degree. Dr. Clara rushed to the ambassador's side. The monitoring equipment was screaming warnings, its displays flashing angry red. Sylvana had fallen into a semi-conscious state, her skin now a sickly gray-blue. "We need to think outside conventional treatments," Dr. Clara announced to her medical team. "Open a channel to all medical personnel on the station. I want every possible idea, no matter how unconventional." As responses began flooding in, one message caught her attention. It was from James Chen, a human physical therapist who worked in the station's rehabilitation center. His message was brief but intriguing. "The Lysarian cooling duct system sounds similar to certain biological systems found in Earth mammals. I might be able to help, but it would involve direct physical contact. I know it's unusual, but if nothing else is working." Dr. Clara looked at her dying patient, then at the message again. In all her years of medical practice, she had learned that sometimes the most unlikely solutions prove to be the right ones. With time running out and no other options, she made her decision. "Get me James Chen," she ordered. "Immediately." As her staff rushed to comply, she could only hope this unconventional approach wouldn't make things worse. But with Ambassador Sylvana's life hanging in the balance, they were out of both time and options. James Chen arrived at the medical bay within minutes, still wearing his therapy center uniform. He found himself facing not just Dr. Clara, but also a hastily assembled group of station officials and medical staff. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Mr. Chen," Dr. Clara began, her scales shifting color slightly with anxiety. "You mentioned something about similar biological systems in Earth mammals." James nodded, trying to keep his voice steady despite the intimidating audience. "Yes, The way you describe the Lysarian cooling system, it reminds me of certain lymphatic and circulatory structures I studied. We have specific massage techniques that help when similar systems get blocked in humans. Security Chief Rodriguez stepped forward, her face stern. You're suggesting we let a human physically touch the ambassador. Do you understand the diplomatic nightmare this could cause? Teleanor, who had been quietly listening, suddenly spoke up. You don't understand. This isn't just about touching. In our culture, the clearing of cooling ducts is intimate. It's traditionally only performed by specially trained members of our own species. The room erupted in murmurs. James felt his face grow hot, but he stood his ground. I understand this is unusual, but I'm approaching this purely from a medical perspective. These techniques have helped countless patients with similar issues. Dr. Clara checked the ambassador's vital signs again and hissed softly. Her temperature has risen another half degree. At this rate, we have maybe 6 hours before permanent damage begins. There has to be another way, Rodriguez insisted. What about synthetic cooling? Ice packs? We've tried everything, Dr. Clara snapped, her patience wearing thin. External cooling isn't enough. The blockage needs to be cleared from within the duct system. James pulled up his medical credentials on his tablet. I have specialized training in cinephysiology alongside my therapy certification. I've worked with 12 different species in the past 5 years. Every procedure is documented and followed strict medical protocols. The station's diplomatic officer, Ms. Patel, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. Perhaps we should ask the ambassador herself. She's still conscious enough to make this decision. They approached Sylvana's bed. Her eyes fluttered open, their usual bright green now dulled with fever. Dr. Clara explained the situation in simple terms, laying out their limited options. A human would do this for me. Sylvana's voice was weak but clear, even knowing the cultural implications. James stepped forward. Ambassador, I give you my word that this will be handled with the utmost professionalism and medical precision. Nothing more, nothing less. Sylvana was quiet for a long moment. The only sound was the beeping of medical equipment. Finally, she spoke. In our history, there are stories of times when tradition had to bow to necessity. She took a shuddering breath. I consent to the procedure. Teleanor looked like he might faint. The High Council will not be pleased. The High Council isn't dying of blocked cooling ducts. Sylvana managed a weak smile. Dr. Clara immediately began preparations. Mr. Chen, you'll need to walk us through exactly what you plan to do. We'll document everything for both medical and diplomatic records. As James began explaining his proposed treatment, he could feel the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. One wrong move could not only cost the ambassador her life, but potentially damage human-Lysarian relations for years to come. We'll need to start soon, he said, looking at the declining vital signs. And everyone needs to understand. This isn't going to be a quick fix. It could take hours. Dr. Clara nodded grimly. Then we better get started. The universe is watching, Mr. Chen. Let's hope your human healing hands are as skilled as you claim. The next hour in Medical Bay was a flurry of activity. James Chen stood at a preparation station, methodically washing his hands while Dr. Clara set up an array of monitoring equipment around Ambassador Sylvana's bed. The air was thick with nervous energy. Tell me again about these ducts, James said as he dried his hands. He needed to be absolutely certain about what he was dealing with. Every detail matters. Dr. Clara pulled up a holographic image of Lysarian anatomy. The cooling system runs through their entire body, like a network of small rivers. The main ducts, she pointed to several large channels, are about the width of your thumb. The smallest ones are no thicker than a human hair. James studied the image carefully. It's remarkably similar to our lymphatic system, but more complex. The blockages, where are they mainly concentrated? The doctor highlighted several areas in red. Here, here, and here. The largest blockage is near the shoulder region, which seems to be causing a chain reaction through the rest of the system. Teleanor, who hadn't left the ambassador's side, spoke up. Our healers use a specific rhythm when clearing blockages. It's passed down through generations of training. James nodded thoughtfully. On Earth, we have similar traditional healing practices, but we've also developed them into scientific techniques. He demonstrated a gentle rolling motion with his hands. The pressure has to be firm enough to affect the deeper tissues, but gentle enough not to cause damage. Ambassador Sylvana watched this discussion through fever-glazed eyes. Her temperature had risen another quarter degree, and her breathing was becoming more labored. I think, James said finally, we should start with the main blockage near the shoulder. If we can clear that, it might help the smaller ones resolve naturally. He looked at Dr. Clara. But I'll need you to monitor everything. If anything seems wrong, tell me immediately. The doctor adjusted her instruments. I'll be watching every vital sign. Ambassador, are you ready to begin? Sylvana managed a weak nod. James approached her bed, his movements calm and professional. I'm going to start very gently, he explained. Please tell me if anything feels wrong or uncomfortable. He placed his hands on her shoulder and immediately noticed something interesting. The Lysarian skin had a slightly different texture than human skin, smoother, with a faint pattern that seemed to follow the paths of the cooling ducts. James began with the lightest pressure, using the techniques he'd perfected over years of practice. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Then, ever so slightly, he felt something shift under his fingers. There's a change in the duct pressure, Dr. Clara announced, excitement in her voice. It's small, but it's there. Encouraged, James adjusted his technique, applying carefully controlled pressure in a rolling motion. He could feel the blockage now, a kind of resistance under the skin that shouldn't be there. Temperature dropping by 0.2 degrees, one of the nurses called out. Teleanor leaned forward, his eyes wide. The color. Her skin color is improving. James stayed focused on his work, tuning out everything except the feeling under his hands and the occasional vital sign updates from Dr. Clara. He had treated thousands of patients, but never one quite like this. Suddenly, there was a distinct sensation of movement under his fingers, like a dam breaking. Ambassador Sylvana took a deep, shuddering breath. Major pressure change in the primary duct system. Dr. Clara's voice was triumphant. The blockage is clearing. James kept working, moving methodically along the duct pathway. With each passing minute, the ambassador's breathing became easier, her color improved, and her temperature began to stabilize. Remarkable, Teleanor whispered, watching the human's hands move with precise, practiced motions. Simply remarkable. But James knew they weren't done yet. This was just the first blockage, and there were several more to go. Still, they had proof now. Proof the human healing arts could indeed help where Lysarian medicine alone could not. We're making progress, he said quietly, continuing his work. But we've got a long night ahead of us. Hours passed in the medical bay, marked only by the steady beeping of monitors and the occasional murmur of conversation. James Chen's arms were beginning to ache, but he didn't dare stop. Each small success with the ambassador's cooling system encouraged him to continue. Tell me about your training, Ambassador Sylvana asked softly, her voice stronger than it had been hours ago. The question surprised everyone. It was the first time she'd initiated conversation since the treatment began. James smiled, keeping his hands moving in the careful patterns he'd developed. I studied for 8 years, he explained, working on a particularly stubborn blockage near her elbow. Started with human anatomy, then branched into xenobiology. Something about understanding how different species heal always fascinated me. Fascinating indeed, Dr. Clara commented, checking the latest readings. Temperature now only 1 degree above normal, and dropping steadily. Her scales rippled with approval. Teleanor, who had been watching the entire procedure with intense interest, leaned closer. The movements you make, they're not random, are they? There's a pattern. Good observation. James nodded, pausing briefly to flex his tired fingers. It follows the natural flow of your cooling system. Just like how water follows the path of least resistance, these ducts have their own natural pathways. The ambassador's aide looked thoughtful. That's very similar to how our traditional healers describe it. They speak of following the rivers of life. A small crowd of medical staff had gathered at the bay's observation window, watching the unprecedented procedure. Word had spread through the station about the human treating the Laserian ambassador, and curiosity had drawn many to witness it firsthand. Another blockage breaking up, James announced, feeling the familiar sensation of resistance giving way under his hands. The ambassador sighed in relief as cool fluid began flowing properly through another section of her cooling system. Dr. Calera's monitoring equipment chirped happily. Primary duct network now operating at 70% capacity. This is remarkable progress. Security Chief Rodriguez, who had remained to observe, finally allowed herself a small smile. I guess we were wrong to doubt you, Mr. Chen. Nobody was wrong to be careful, James replied diplomatically, starting work on another blocked section. This is completely new territory for everyone. We're making medical history here, one duct at a time. Ambassador Silvana turned her head slightly to look at him. Her eyes, once dulled by fever, were now bright and alert. You know, on my world, those who help maintain our cooling systems are highly respected. They train for decades before being allowed to practice. Yet here you are, Telnor added, achieving the same results with completely different techniques. James shook his head modestly. Not the same, just similar enough to help. Sometimes that's all we need. Finding the common ground between different ways of healing. Suddenly, the ambassador's entire body shuddered. James froze, worried he'd done something wrong. But Dr. Calera's excited voice quickly reassured him. The final major blockage is clearing. All primary ducts are responding. The effect was immediate and visible. The ambassador's skin flushed with healthy color, and her breathing became deep and regular. The temperature readings dropped to normal levels for the first time since she'd fallen ill. How do you feel? James asked, finally stepping back from the bed. Ambassador Silvana sat up slowly, testing her limbs. Like myself again, she said, wonder in her voice. I never thought. A human. She paused, seemingly at a loss for words. Sometimes the best solutions come from unexpected places, Dr. Calera said wisely, reviewing the final medical scans. And sometimes it takes an outsider to show us new ways of solving old problems. James flexed his sore hands, satisfaction washing over him. They had done more than just heal a patient today. They had broken down barriers that had seemed insurmountable just hours ago. Telnor was already typing rapidly on his communication device. The High Council will want a full report on this. They won't believe it without documentation. Let them doubt, Ambassador Silvana said firmly. The proof is in the healing. The success of James Chen's initial treatment brought a wave of relief through the medical bay, but it was short-lived. Just as Dr. Calera was preparing her final report, the monitoring equipment began screaming alerts. Her temperature spiking again. Dr. Calera's scales flashed with alarm. Something's wrong. James rushed back to the ambassador's side. Her skin had taken on a mottled appearance, and she was gasping for breath. Telnor let out a distressed cry. The secondary duct system. Ambassador Silvana managed to whisper between labored breaths. It's different from the primary ones. Dr. Calera quickly pulled up the detailed anatomical scans. She's right. The secondary system has a completely different structure. The blockages there are spreading, not clearing. James felt his heart sink. The techniques he'd used successfully on the primary ducts weren't working on these smaller, more delicate pathways. Each attempt seemed to make things worse, not better. Think, James, think, he muttered to himself, studying the new scans. The secondary ducts were arranged in an intricate pattern, almost like a spider's web. They were also much more sensitive than the primary system. Telenor stepped forward, wringing his hands. In our traditions, the secondary ducts require a completely different approach. Our healers use what they call the butterfly touch. James looked up sharply. Butterfly touch. Can you explain more? It's like. Telenor struggled to find the words. Like touching a soap bubble without breaking it. The lightest possible contact. A memory flashed through James's mind. A technique he'd learned years ago for treating premature human infants, whose blood vessels were incredibly delicate. Dr. Clara, he said urgently, I need the finest pressure sensors you have. And some of that new biomedical gel from the research lab. The doctor quickly understood. The gel will help you maintain the lightest possible contact. Brilliant. She rushed to gather the supplies. James coated his fingertips with the special gel and attached the microscopic pressure sensors. The sensors would beep if he applied too much force, anything stronger than the touch of a butterfly's wing. Ambassador, he said gently, I'm going to try something very different now. It might feel strange, but try to stay as still as possible. With infinite care, James began working on the secondary ducts. His fingers barely ghosted over the ambassador's skin, guided by the quiet beeping of the pressure sensors. The gel allowed his touch to glide smoothly while maintaining the precise, feather-like contact needed. Minutes ticked by intense silence. Dr. Clara watched the readings like a hawk, while Telenor held his breath. The ambassador lay perfectly still, her eyes closed in concentration. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, things began to change. The mottled appearance of her skin started to fade. Her breathing became easier. It's working, Dr. Clara announced, her voice filled with relief. The secondary ducts are responding. The blockages are dissolving naturally, just as they should. James continued his delicate work, moving with practiced precision. Each successful clearing encouraged him to continue, though his arms trembled with the effort of maintaining such controlled light contact. After what seemed like hours, the last of the secondary blockages cleared. The ambassador's vital signs stabilized completely, and her skin returned to its healthy azure shade. Remarkable, Dr. Clara said, reviewing the final scans. By combining human therapeutic techniques with Lycerian healing principles, you've accomplished something unprecedented. Ambassador Sylvana opened her eyes, looking at James with newfound respect. You adapted your methods to match our needs. Not many would have shown such flexibility. That's what humans do best. James smiled, finally lowering his tired arms. We observe, we learn, and we adapt. Sometimes the best solutions come from blending different approaches. Telenor was already composing a message to the Lycerian Medical Council. They'll want to study this new technique, a human innovation that works with our most delicate biological systems. It's unheard of. The ambassador nodded in agreement. Perhaps it's time for both our peoples to learn from each other. After all, she added with a slight smile, healing knows no species barriers. News of Ambassador Sylvana's treatment spread through Space Station Gamma 7 like wildfire. Within hours of the successful procedure, the station's communication systems were overwhelmed with incoming messages from across the galaxy. James Chen sat in the station's main conference room, surrounded by holographic displays showing various Lycerian medical officials. Their normally blue faces filled the air with shades of curiosity and concern. You must understand our position, said Head Healer Vortex, his image flickering slightly. This procedure has been exclusively performed by Lycerian specialists for thousands of years. The idea that a human could not only attempt it but succeed. He trailed off, clearly struggling with the concept. Ambassador Sylvana, now fully recovered, stepped forward. Yet succeed he did, Head Healer. I stand before you as living proof. Dr. Clara pulled up the detailed medical logs. Every moment was documented. We recorded everything from pressure levels to temperature changes. The data is quite extraordinary. The Lycerian Medical Council members leaned forward in their seats, their professional curiosity overcoming their initial skepticism. James could see their eyes darting back and forth as they reviewed the readings. "These techniques," another council member spoke up, "they're so different from our traditional methods, yet the results." She paused, studying a particular set of readings. "The results are undeniable." James cleared his throat. "With all due respect, I didn't replace your traditional methods. I adapted human therapeutic techniques to work alongside them." The success came from combining both approaches. Teleanor, who had been quietly observing, added, "It's true. I watched the entire procedure." Mr. Chen showed great respect for our healing traditions while adding his own knowledge. The council members whispered among themselves. Finally, head healer Vortex spoke again. "We would like to send a team of our best healers to study these new techniques, and perhaps—" He hesitated, then continued, "perhaps some of our medical knowledge could be shared in return." Ambassador Sylvana's eyes widened. This was unprecedented. Lysarian healing techniques had never been shared with outsiders before. "Think of the possibilities," Dr. Clara said excitedly. "A medical exchange program between our species could benefit everyone. Human adaptability combined with Lysarian traditional knowledge." "There would need to be strict protocols," head healer Vortex cautioned. "Not everyone has Mr. Chen's delicate touch." James nodded in agreement. "Of course, we could start small, maybe a pilot program here on the station. Dr. Clara's medical bay already has all the necessary monitoring equipment." The ambassador smiled. "And I would be happy to serve as a liaison between our medical communities. After all, I have first-hand experience with the benefits of this cooperation." More messages were pouring in now, not just from Lysarian medical officials, but from other species as well. Word had spread about how human therapeutic techniques had successfully adapted to alien biology. "The implications go beyond just our two species," Dr. Clara noted, gesturing to the incoming messages. "This could open new doors in interspecies medicine across the galaxy." Head healer Vortex straightened in his chair. "Very well. We will begin preparations immediately. Mr. Chen, we would be honored if you would help develop the training protocols for this new program." James felt a wave of responsibility settle on his shoulders. What had started as an emergency treatment was about to become something much bigger. "The honor is mine," he replied. "Though I have to ask, will the cultural aspects of the traditional treatment be a problem?" The head healer actually laughed, a sound rarely heard from Lysarian officials. "Mr. Chen, you've already shattered our oldest cultural barriers with your success. I think we can find a way to work around any remaining ones." As the meeting concluded and the holograms faded, Ambassador Sylvana turned to James. "You've started something remarkable here," she said softly. "Sometimes it takes a crisis to show us new possibilities." James looked around at the excited faces of his colleagues, human, Lysarian, and various other species. Something new was beginning here, something that went beyond just medical treatment. "We're all on this journey together," he said. "Might as well share what we know along the way." 3 months after Ambassador Sylvana's treatment, Space Station Gamma 7's medical bay looked very different. What had once been a standard medical facility was now a buzzing center of interspecies healing arts. James Chen stood at the front of a small classroom attached to the medical bay, facing an unusual group of students. There were 5 Lysarian healers, their blue skin gleaming under the lights, alongside 3 human physical therapists. Dr. Clara sat in the back, taking notes. "Today we're going to discuss the importance of pressure variation," James explained, demonstrating with his hands. "Different species require different touches, but the principles remain similar." One of the Lysarian healers, Martel, raised her hand. "We've noticed that your techniques often mirror our traditional movements, but with subtle differences. Is this intentional?" James smiled. "Actually, it shows how different cultures can develop similar solutions to the same problems. Your cooling system treatments and our lymphatic massage techniques evolved separately, but they share common ground." In the main medical bay, visible through a large window, Ambassador Sylvana was showing a group of visiting doctors the monitoring equipment that had been used during her treatment. The story of her cure had sparked interest across multiple star systems. The beauty of human adaptation, she was saying, is their ability to take existing knowledge and reshape it to meet new challenges. Watch this demonstration. On a nearby bed, a human therapist was working with a Lysarian patient, their movements careful and precise. Monitoring equipment showed the patient's cooling system responding perfectly to the treatment. 3 months ago, this would have been unthinkable. Telnor commented from his position near the door. He had become a regular presence in the medical bay, documenting the program's progress for the High Council. Dr. Clara's scales rippled with pride as she watched another Lysarian healer successfully apply modified human techniques to treat a human patient with lymphatic issues. The exchange of knowledge goes both ways, she noted. We're learning as much from them as they are from us. Back in the classroom, James was addressing a question about cultural sensitivity. Yes, these treatments were once considered very private in Lysarian culture. But by approaching them with medical professionalism and respect, we've shown that healing can transcend cultural boundaries. A message alert flashed on the room's main screen. It was from the Galactic Medical Association. They wanted to feature the program in their next conference. They're calling it the Chen Sylvana Protocol, Dr. Clara announced, reading the message. They want to use it as a model for other interspecies medical exchange programs. Ambassador Sylvana, who had finished her tour, joined them in the classroom. The High Council has officially endorsed the program, she said, her voice filled with satisfaction. They're even suggesting expanding it to other stations. James watched as his human and Lysarian students practiced together, each learning from the other's techniques. What had started as an emergency solution had grown into something far more significant. You know, Martel said thoughtfully, demonstrating a traditional Lysarian movement to her human colleague. Our oldest healers used to say that true healing comes from understanding. I don't think they meant just understanding biology. Telnor nodded in agreement. Understanding each other, our different ways of thinking and healing. That's the real breakthrough here. A small crowd had gathered at the observation window, watching the classes and treatments with interest. Among them were medical professionals from various species, all eager to learn how this unprecedented cooperation had come about. Next week, James announced to his class, we'll have visitors from the Centaurian Medical Academy. They're interested in adapting these techniques for their species. Ambassador Sylvana placed a hand on James's shoulder. From saving one life to changing how species heal each other. Not bad for a human physical therapist. James watched his students practice, pride filling his chest. We're just getting started, he said. There's so much more we can learn from each other. As the day's lessons continued, the medical bay hummed with activity. A symphony of different species working together, learning from each other, breaking down barriers one treatment at a time. 1 year after the emergency treatment that changed everything, Space Station Gamma 7 hosted a special ceremony. The main observation deck, usually used for viewing the stars, had been transformed into an elegant gathering space filled with representatives from dozens of species. James Chen stood near the podium, feeling slightly uncomfortable in his formal uniform. Next to him, Ambassador Sylvana was radiant in traditional Lysarian ceremonial robes, her azure skin glowing with health. When I was dying from a simple blocked cooling duct, the ambassador began her speech. I never imagined it would lead to this moment. Today, we celebrate not just a medical breakthrough, but a new era of interspecies cooperation. The crowd included medical professionals from across the galaxy. Dr. Clara sat in the front row, her scales shimmering with pride. Telnor, now the official coordinator of the Interspecies Medical Exchange Program, was busy recording the historic event. The numbers speak for themselves. Ambassador Sylvana continued. In just 1 year, over 300 medical professionals from 15 different species have trained in the Chen Sylvana Protocol. Treatments once limited to single species are being adapted for others. Lives are being saved in ways we never thought possible. On the large screens behind her, images showed the program's success stories. A Centaurian healer using modified Lyssarian techniques to treat a human child's rare condition. Human therapists working alongside Lyssarian healers to help an injured Andorian athlete. Medical students from different worlds learning together in the station's expanded medical bay. Head healer Vortex, who had traveled from the Lyssarian homeworld for the ceremony, stepped up to the podium. A year ago, I questioned whether we should share our healing arts with other species. Today, I question why we waited so long. The audience chuckled warmly. James remembered how much resistance there had been at first. Now the same people who had opposed the program were its strongest supporters. The human ability to adapt and innovate, Vortex continued, combined with our traditional knowledge, has created something greater than either alone. Today, we officially established the Interspecies Medical Academy here on Station Gamma 7. The announcement was met with enthusiastic applause. The Academy would serve as a permanent center for medical exchange between species, with both James and Ambassador Sylvana serving as its first directors. Dr. Clara took the podium next. When Mr. Chen first suggested treating the ambassador, many thought it was impossible. But humans have a saying, necessity is the mother of invention. Sometimes the impossible becomes possible simply because we have no other choice. James finally stepped up to speak. Looking out at the diverse crowd, he felt honored to be part of this moment. A year ago, I was just trying to save one life. But in doing so, we discovered something important. Healing is universal. The methods may differ, the biology may vary, but the desire to help others crosses all species boundaries. Ambassador Sylvana joined him at the podium. Today, we're not just celebrating the past year's achievements. We're looking forward to a future where medical knowledge flows freely between all species, where no one suffers simply because their cure might exist in another culture's healing arts. The ceremony concluded with the official opening of the Academy's new wings, state-of-the-art facilities designed to accommodate students and patients from any known species. The medical bay where it all started had been preserved as a historic site, complete with the original equipment used to treat the ambassador. As the crowds mingled afterward, James found himself standing with Ambassador Sylvana near the observation windows. The stars stretched out before them, countless worlds full of possibilities. "Did you ever imagine," she asked softly, "that your healing hands would change so many lives?" James watched as a group of new students, human, Lyssarian, and several other species, walked past, chatting excitedly about their upcoming classes. "No," he admitted, "but that's the wonderful thing about humans. We never stop looking for new ways to help." The ambassador smiled. "And that's why we need you out here among the stars. You show us that differences don't have to divide us. They can make us stronger." Together, they watched the stars twinkle, each one representing another world, another species, another opportunity to share the healing arts that had brought them all together.